Is it worth adding another monthly expense with pet health insurance premiums? Let's find out.
Welcome to Dog Cancer Answers, where we help you help your dog with cancer.
Dr. Amanda Hensley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, and call me Amanda, please.
Oh, okay. Happy to do that. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for joining us to talk to us about pet insurance, something that too few Americans have. Am I right?
Absolutely. This is a hill I will die on, that I think everyone should have pet insurance for all your pets. And it's definitely a growing industry and something that we're seeing more and more of in practice. But I think many pets are still underinsured, especially for major accidents and illnesses, which is, the main concern with most pet insurances.
Yeah. So, is it like human health insurance? Does it cover kind of the gamut of things, or is it just for emergencies, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different options out there. The two main things that pet owners will come across at this point are wellness plans and accident and illness plans. And I'm going to focus more on accident and illness plans, but I'll talk a little bit about wellness plans just to start us off. These are more typically offered by veterinary practices. Banfield is the one that I'm most familiar with, and I think probably one of the first companies to offer these wellness plans. And basically, they're more for covering your preventative care. You pay a monthly fee or an annual fee, and that includes certain services, usually, again, referring to Banfield, that covers vaccines, blood work, a urinalysis, fecal exams, and a variety of other things depending on which plan you're on. But they are definitely more geared towards the kind of recommended annual things that you expect. Those things can be expensive too, so it's a good way to kind of stay on top of your pet's preventative care without having that bigger yearly bill. So you can just pay monthly and have those services included. Those plans do not typically cover accidents and illnesses, so that's where the bigger kind of unexpected expenses often come in. And the pet insurance plans that I'll be focusing on mostly today are more for accidents and illnesses, for those kind of unexpected expenses that can get really costly really quickly if something happens that you're not prepared for or not expecting.
Okay, so wellness plans are not necessarily offered by a pet insurance company as much as sort of by maybe a large association or a large corporate chain of veterinary practices, where they have the scale where they can afford to say, hey, you pay a monthly fee and you get all of these wellness services throughout the year as necessary for your pet to prevent anything or to catch things early when they're more treatable. Is that
Correct.
kind of the idea?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think there are some of the pet insurance companies that are now including preventative services. That's definitely a newer thing, but my experience has been that the wellness plans are more offered by veterinary practices, and it is often the bigger kind of chain type practices, but there are smaller practices that are starting to offer those as well to help pet owners kind of offset some of those costs throughout the year.
That's kind of nice to pay a monthly premium, but then not have a real bill if you're going in and you're just getting routine blood work and a physical exam and sort of whatever it is that your dog at that stage of life needs on a wellness basis every year. So it takes the sting out of those vet bills that can confront you when you get them all at once.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. That's really nice. Now, you mentioned that the accident and illness plans that are typically from a pet insurance company are for less expected things. But I just want to say that we should all expect that our dogs are at risk for cancer, because 1 out of 2 dogs over the age of 10 gets it, right? It's like we could actually say that's almost an expected illness at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, we often refer to it as kind of the unexpected expenses, but that's when I talk to pet owners, especially those that aren't really interested in insurance, that's one of the things that always comes up is just, oh, my dog's healthy. We've never had any issues with our dogs and that kind of thinking. And that's fantastic that they've never encountered one of those things.
Yeah.
But at some point, your dog's going to get sick. And like you said, cancer is really common. That is something that we see daily in practice, not necessarily serious life-threatening cancers, but all kinds of lumps and bumps and, anything like that you're not necessarily planning ahead for, but we should be thinking about.
What other illnesses would you have on your radar for people to be thinking about as their dogs age?
Yeah, so most companies will cover really any kind of accident, any kind of illness. Thinking back to my own previous dogs, I had one that had chronic gastrointestinal issues. So even though it wasn't, we never really found an underlying cause. He probably just kept eating things outside that he shouldn't have. And he would end up
he was
with
just naughty.
Exactly. So
he was a gourmand.
Exactly. So inevitably he would end up with vomiting and diarrhea. And we would be at the clinic taking x-rays and just make sure there's not a blockage and that sort of thing. So even your kind of routine everyday illnesses are often covered by these plans and are things that your dog's going to encounter at some point. And to, from the veterinary perspective, we often treat these things symptomatically just because we don't want the owner to have a big bill and because they're not necessarily life-threatening. But the standard of care often is to do x-rays or do an ultrasound and just make sure that we're not missing something. And those things can be costly, and those costs can add up really quickly just for kind of a routine sort of minor illness.
Wow. So if you have a puppy who likes to eat gravel and rusty nails and all of the various kinds of poop out there, and that continues, that might be a dog that's eligible for a pet insurance plan for later in life when you're looking, like a couple times a year, you have to take them in for x-rays to make sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow. I'd never thought of that. Okay, so how does this work in terms of, is it the same, like premiums, deductibles, technically, how does this work?
So it is similar in a lot of ways to the health insurance that we're used to for humans. Luckily, it is typically a lot simpler than our health insurance plans. Typically, there is a monthly premium, and then you have a deductible. Those are kind of dependent on your pet's age, breed. The premiums can vary depending on what level your deductible is. And one of the main differences then is that there is also the reimbursement kind of component. So most pet insurance plans then, instead of, you might go to the doctor, you may or may not have a copay or pay something out of pocket. With pet insurance, you're typically paying the bill up front and then submitting a invoice. And once the company goes through the invoice, then they will reimburse you for whatever coverage your plan includes. And just like on the human side, the deductible is kind of how much you're responsible for paying regardless of what the bill is. So most of the plans that I'm familiar with have an annual deductible of, $250 or $500, for example. And once you reach that deductible, then there's a percentage that they reimburse you. So again, most plans, you can choose 70%, 80%, or 90%. And your premiums are going to change based on your deductible level and the percentage of reimbursement.
Okay. So the more that you ask them to pay on the back end when you have a problem, the more premium your premium is probably going to be higher on a month-to-month basis.
Yes, typically
right.
the higher deductible. Typically, the lower the premium is, just like on the human side. And then the reimbursement's really kind of the main difference and what makes it much more straightforward. But again, some of them do offer 100% reimbursement. You're going to pay a lot higher premiums for those than the lower percentage. But most companies, I think, have options so you can kind of mix and match, so you can kind of find a premium that works for you based on, kind of what you're comfortable with paying every month or every year, and depending on your deductible and your level of reimbursement.
So when you're choosing these plans, are they kind of like human? My dad used to be in the insurance industry. I grew up in Connecticut, where everybody was in the insurance industry. So I know all the tricks of the insurance industry, one of which is to never offer the same plan as your competitor, so that you can never make an apples to apples comparison between insurance plans and insurance providers. So I'm wondering if something similar happens on the pet insurance side. Are they kind of clever about never having their plan exactly match everybody else's, so that you kind of have to hunt and choose?
Yeah, I would say that happens to some degree. I think it's probably less pronounced than in the insurance industry that we're used to. I think when I first finished veterinary school, there were only a couple of companies to choose from, and they were not drastically different in coverage. And as more and more companies have started and have kind of upped their marketing, and of course, as social media and Facebook and everything has gotten more popular, so people are better connected and talking about, what's going on. I just had a long conversation with a friend about her pet insurance, and it was very different than what I had for my guys. So I do think that happens to some degree. And there's a lot of variation in kind of coverages and exclusions and things like that. But I would venture a guess that most of them are fairly similar, because the veterinary industry is a little simpler overall than the human healthcare industry.
Sure, that's true. So do you have a favorite provider?
So I would say I have two. My dogs were always insured with Healthy Paws Pet Insurance, and I found them just to be fantastic. I had them for probably about 8 years for one dog, and
Wow, okay.
12 or more years for another dog.
Oh,
And
wow.
I literally never had any issues getting reimbursed, and they were very clear about, what was covered, what wasn't covered. I can't say enough good things about them. They, like most companies, the premiums did go up every year. So when our plan would renew, as my dog's age, the premiums went up, and it was kind of dramatic over the course of my last dog's life, over the course of 10 years. But still, I think that compared to the costs of things that happened at the end of his life, it was definitely worth it, and not that much. I do think that that's something that people are surprised by when the premium goes up every year. So I think that pet owners should kind of expect that, because as your dog ages, you expect them to be more expensive, and they're going to be more prone to getting, chronic diseases and injuries and things like that. But to answer your question, I've been really happy with Healthy Paws. And then I have a friend and former client who has Fetch. I think it used to be called Pet Plan, and it's now called Fetch. And they have had, they now have 3 problematic pets that they have all insured, and have been very, very happy with their coverage from Fetch and kind of their experience with them.
If my dog already has cancer, am I going to get, and do I have any hope of getting that covered?
Probably not the cancer itself, and that is a common question. I am not aware of any companies that cover pre-existing conditions. So something that has already been diagnosed is probably going to be on their list of exclusions. That being said, there's a lot of things that come with cancer and cancer treatment, and we're often talking about older dogs. So if you are, say your dog is, undergoing chemo for a certain type of cancer, but they also have arthritis and or are prone to getting GI issues from the chemo, then those things are more likely to be covered. A lot of companies cover acupuncture and rehab and medications and things like that. So things that aren't necessarily directly related to the cancer, but that you might be looking into treating your dog for at the same time. So it can still help offset some of those costs for kind of giving your dog the best overall treatment for what they have going on.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So if I have if just a hypothetical dog who has lymphoma, I've committed to the CHOP protocol, and that's thousands of dollars. I decide to set up an insurance plan for them. It's not going to cover the CHOP, but it might cover the rehab that the dog needs as a result of, let's say, muscle wasting that leads to arthritis, that then they are now like not as mobile as they used to be, that there are other things going on that could get covered.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, of course, is going to vary a bit between companies. I think most companies are pretty cut and dry about what they cover and what they don't. And, say your dog has lymphoma and that's considered a pre-existing condition because it's already been diagnosed, but you get insurance after the diagnosis, and then your dog starts to have the muscle wasting and is, diagnosed with arthritis or, whatever, and rehab is recommended, then that typically would be considered a separate condition from the cancer because it is. They're, of course, interrelated, but it's, in that case, you're kind of treating arthritis, not cancer. So a lot of the companies will still cover other things that are going on at the same time.
A car accident, for example.
Exactly. Yeah.
That dog could get the surgery or emergency services covered. Okay. Well, that's interesting. I've always thought, well, once your dog has cancer, there's really no point, but maybe there really is.
Yeah. And I think it all comes down to a pet owner's kind of financial situation. A lot of folks will put themselves in a bind to treat their animals, and if they're able to, say the cancer that you're treating is curable, or the treatment protocol is, short term but still expensive, and you want to make sure that you're covered for other things, then I do think it's worth looking into.
Yeah. Have you ever done an analysis with your own dogs about what things would have cost if you didn't have those monthly premiums in place? Like how much money you actually ended up saving over time?
I did, of sorts. So my last dog, Murphy, he ended up when he was about 12, having a fibroma in his mouth. And the treatment for that, it's a benign cancer typically, but it's locally destructive. So you typically have to remove that. And so in his case, he was an older guy. He'd been healthy up to that point. So there were many times throughout the years that I was paying these premiums, and we almost never needed to use insurance. So I was, every year back and forth about, am I going to keep doing this or am I going to cancel it? And luckily I kept it because that fibroma, the surgery ended up costing about $7,000 when it was all said and done. We had to do a CT scan first to make sure that it was resectable and to kind of plan the surgery. And then just all the diagnostics that go into that. We typically want to do chest x-rays to make sure he doesn't have any tumors anywhere else, and blood work, and just all the things to make sure he's healthy enough for surgery. So that was about in total $7,000. And I did the math on it, and up to that point had paid about $5,000 or less into his insurance plan, and I ended up spending out of pocket about $700 on the surgery because he was covered at 90% reimbursement, and it at that point became very clear that
that it had
luckily
been
I
worth it.
had kept that for all that time.
So you saved about over $1,000 on cash outlay, and you also had the prepayment of that in a way, like
right.
that you didn't have to do it all at once. It was paid out over time. I'm sure your budget appreciated that.
Oh, yes.
Instead of one big bill.
Yeah. And that was
this is why people don't treat things sometimes.
Exactly.
Because they look at it and they say, I cannot afford this.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, that was just one incident. He also, shortly after that, had some liver issues. So we did, ultrasound and biopsy and all these things, and those added up. And, the last 2 years of his life, he was very expensive and was fully covered by. So I like the way you phrase that. It's kind of a prepayment for these future issues.
Let's assume that things will eventually go wrong and that we need to have a cushion.
Absolutely.
So when you get your dog covered young, does that make a difference in your mind? It
does. I think so. One of the challenges with pet insurance is that most companies don't cover pre-existing conditions. So if you're starting them as a puppy, which with the dog I was just talking about, he was a young adult when I got him, and I got him insured on day one because my previous dog was kind of a health nightmare. So I learned my lesson. And like I mentioned before, his premiums did go up every year. So when he was, I think he was about 2 when we first insured him, and his premiums were something like $27 a month. And when he died at 14 or 15 last year, his premiums were like $130 a month. So it's a pretty big difference, but that's over, 12 years. And like we just talked about, the cost savings was totally worth it with all the things that happened later in life. All that being said, I think in his case, it wasn't an issue, but a lot of folks will wait until something happens. And then it gets a little bit more complicated at that point because just like a lot of insurance companies, though, they're going to look for pre-existing conditions. So if you sign your dog up when he's, say, 2, and he has a 2-year history of having chronic gastrointestinal issues, then they may not cover that in the future. They may consider that pre-existing. And in my experience as a rehab vet, I would see dogs that have ACL tears really frequently. And companies, that commonly happens in both knees, and people, the dog tears its ACL, they go in, they realize it's going to cost $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 for the surgery. So then they want to get insurance, and the companies kind of caught on or like, no, this is pre-existing. If it happened in one leg, it's going to happen in the other one. So I think that starting them young is essential, and I don't think I can't say ever too late, but I don't think it's too late at most points in life to start with insurance. But the earlier you start, the better, as far as kind of avoiding those pre-existing things and just, some crazy accident happening and then them not being able to be covered.
Right. So it sounds to me like insurance is, well, my dad would have said, insurance is peace of mind.
Yes.
You're paying for peace of mind. So to get the optimal peace of mind with your dog, would you say the best thing to do is when you get a new dog, whatever age, if you have access to a wellness plan for daily stuff, for everyday stuff, and then get a pet insurance plan for accidents and illnesses? Does that sound like a good strategy?
I think so. I think especially if your financial situation is kind of uncertain for whatever reason, I think that having both is ideal. I never really was interested in the wellness plans personally because those are expenses that I expect to have with my dogs. And that's just something that I know they're going to have vaccines and they're going to have blood work and that sort of thing. At this point, I don't have any pets at the moment, but the next dog I get, I know my little Murphy guy died about a year ago, and I have not have not gotten any new companions yet. I'm sure it's only a matter of time. And when
I'm
I
sure it
do, I
is.
will probably look for either a clinic that offers wellness plans or something similar in addition to getting pet insurance, because it's just, I don't know. I like the peace of mind reference. It's just so nice to, like, yes, it's a monthly bill, but it's small compared to the every 6 month bill that you're going to get, or every year bill you're going to get if you're staying on top of all the preventative care. And then I often tell people to consider, when you're thinking about this, I think a lot of folks have never spent more than a couple $100s at a time on their dog. And that's just not the world that we live in anymore. So I encourage pet owners to think about it in the sense of like, okay, you have a $10,000 bill tomorrow. How are you going to handle that? Can you handle that? And think about it in kind of through that lens, because the realistically, it's things are very expensive in the veterinary world, and it's not because veterinary professionals are trying to get rich or anything. We're just paying the
Mm-mm.
same prices for equipment and drugs and all those things. So it costs a lot of money to treat your dogs and keep veterinary clinics open. And
When you're getting a dog, think of it as a $10,000 investment that at
yeah,
some point you're going to have to pay $10,000.
yeah,
And it'll be all at
absolutely.
once at the end of life, or it'll be over time.
Yeah,
And that the insurance, if you insure them young when they have ideally no pre-existing, then all of those things will eventually be covered to a large extent, and you'll end up saving or maximizing that $10,000 outlay
yeah,
and paying it over time.
yes, absolutely.
Wow. I've never thought about it. Do you think that $10,000 is a good sort of budget per dog?
That is a really good question, and an argument that I have with folks a lot. I just a few days ago, a woman that I know was planning on canceling her insurance for her 3 dogs because, unfortunately, I can totally understand her frustration. The insurance company is just not reimbursing her as she expected them to, and she can't get an explanation as to why. So her
Oh.
argument was, if she just puts that money in a savings account and has,
Mhm.
in 3 years, she would have $10,000, but she has 3 dogs. And, like, I also think that anybody should have that savings for their pets as well. But that can be wiped out in 3 or 4 days if your dog gets hit by a car or just
Yep.
anything crazy that happens. One of my good friend's dog was just, we still have no idea what happened. She was just really sick one day. She was hospitalized for 4 or 5 days. She got better, and it was $12,000. And she was in the ICU for about 5 days on fluids, and of course getting repeat blood work. And we still don't have any answers. And it was $12,000, and that can happen at any moment. And I think that's the type of thing that folks don't think about. So I would say at least you can blow through that really quickly if surgery or hospitalization or chemotherapy or some of these more advanced treatments are required.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tell me another crazy patient story.
There's so many. I had a young Australian Shepherd a few years ago that, these are super responsible pet owners, very well trained dog. He's never done this before, but for whatever reason, the Amazon guy or somebody knocked on the door. They opened the door right as a bunny ran by. The
Oh
dog
no.
bolted, ran out into the street, got hit by a car.
Oh.
And she was fine ultimately, but she did have surgery twice. She had pelvic fractures and some nerve
Oh.
injuries. So after 2 surgeries, and this was when I was still in a rehab practice, she was seeing me for rehab twice a week. And it was over about a 4 month period that we were doing rehab to get her walking again. And once she started walking again and getting stronger, she went on and did great and made a complete recovery. But that was just shy of $18,000 after all the diagnostics and hospitalization and 2 major surgeries and then the associated rehab. And they were very thankful that they had pet insurance for her. They covered, I can't remember what their reimbursement level was, but they ended up paying a very small portion of that out of pocket, and luckily, could afford it. But still, $18,000. That's even your portion of that is still a lot. So I think that
my goodness,
I don't know. You just have to be prepared for those things. We see sad cases all the time of people that simply just can't afford it, and it breaks our hearts as veterinarians too when we come across these things that are fixable, but there's just not funds to fix it.
That must be really heartbreaking. Obviously, it's really heartbreaking for the pet parent, but that must feel very, very stressful for you as a veterinarian.
Yes, it is. And, most of us would do the job for free or for very little if we could, but that's just not realistic. So we see pets all the time that we want to do more for and just can't because of the expenses associated with it.
So that's why you want people to get pet insurance.
Yes, absolutely.
So they don't have
Always.
to make that decision based solely on finances.
Yes. Yeah. And, back to your reference of calling insurance peace of mind, it's, for me, it's totally worth it if, $100 a month or $30 a month or whatever it is, to know that if my dog is diagnosed with a terrible type of cancer or has a serious injury or illness, that I can just go for it. I don't have to, try to find money or try to figure out how I'm going to pay for it. And, a lot of people will put themselves in bad situations financially to take care of their pets. And, and we hate to see that happen too.
Yeah. There's a lot of, that I've heard from a lot of people over the years who took out a second mortgage or went into credit card debt that they absolutely did not know how they were going to pay back, but they needed to take care of their dog at that moment. And so they took that risk, and it's really, really difficult. Whether things work out the way you hope or not, it's still difficult to face those bills when they come due.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. So I have a question that might be a little hard for you to answer as the animal lover you are. But what dogs should absolutely be insured from the moment they can be insured? Because you just look at them and think that dog's going to get X, Y, or Z. Like what are the unhealthiest dogs, I guess, is another way of asking. I would
say, of course, my opinion is all of them. But if I had to pick, we definitely see a lot of issues with, the doodle breeds. Doodle mixes are increasingly popular, and they have all sorts of issues we're finding with allergies and mobility, joint problems. They seem to inherit often the bad health issues from both sides, and that's not exclusive to doodles. That's really common with a lot of breeds. So I would, if I was picking a group, I would say any purebred or purposefully bred dog, and especially
purposefully
those
bred. I like that.
Yeah. And especially those that are, in Colorado, everyone has, a quote unquote adventure dogs. So they're climbing mountains and things like that. And it's just incredible how dogs will find ways to injure themselves. So any dog that you're going out, here, rattlesnakes are a big issue. So, and everybody's out hiking all the time, all summer. So any dog that you're going to be active with, competing with, anything like that, athlete dogs and dogs that are super active, I would absolutely recommend it.
When you're looking at setting up a new insurance plan, do you recommend people just call the insurance provider and talk to somebody so they can get questions answered and maybe get some insights they wouldn't get just from the website?
Absolutely. I think that's going to be really important because, of course, everything that's written in, legalese is going to be maybe a little more confusing than it has to be.
Mm-hmm.
So, especially finding out about exceptions, like what's not covered and when and why. And if there's some companies will put a cap on how much they pay out in a year or over the dog's lifetime. And there's all kinds of just little things in some of these policies. So talking to somebody to iron out some of those, I think would be really helpful. And I don't think I've ever actually had anybody do this while I was practicing, but I would be thrilled if a client just wanted to sit down and talk about pet insurance and have their veterinarian talk to, or a veterinary staff member talk to someone at the company if they have specific questions. Because I think the average pet owner, I think, doesn't really necessarily know what questions to ask or what to expect or what some of these things mean. So I think talking to your veterinary team can be really helpful, and talking to somebody at the company, because of course websites are marketing, so they're not going to display the things that they don't want you to know very prominently, or the things that they may not want to advertise. So the information should be there, but you probably have to dig for it a lot more. And I think just talking to a person is probably going to get you more information a little bit.
I think so too. And also asking questions like, what is not covered, and what is the problem with this? Like, why shouldn't I buy this plan versus that plan? Like, what is the real difference here? Because whenever somebody's offering you more than one option, there's a reason, right? Something's excluded or something's included, or both. And so asking, like, I mean, these are all salespeople, right? Their job is to get you to buy, and they have to have answers for those questions. And the best time to ask somebody who's selling you something lots of questions is before you've actually put any money in.
Yes, absolutely.
They're most motivated to be helpful and to reward you with the best possible deal at that moment.
Yeah. And that's a good point too, and something we haven't touched on yet, that I think it's particularly important when you're choosing a company to kind of have the whole picture up front, because it's not that you can't change plans, but again, pre-existing conditions are likely not covered. So if you're with a plan for a couple of years and you're not happy with it and you switch to something, then anything that's in your dog's medical record in those few years can be considered pre-existing. So I think, it's hard to know, but I think making the most educated decision that you can early on is really important.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I know Nationwide has been doing these incredible they've been doing all these white papers. We've had Dr. Jules Benson on a couple of times to talk about what they've been finding as they look at their millions of claims, and they're looking for patterns. And then they're writing white papers about like what happens with dogs in a certain illness and what they're finding out from their claims. So it's interesting because Nationwide has been doing all of this analysis of all of their claims, and they're finding these really interesting things that are breed specific or size specific. They did one paper on size. And one of the things they found was that for small dogs, they were more likely than medium size and large dogs to get breast cancer at an early age.
Interesting.
And this is really unusual, right? Because small dogs typically get lower rates of cancer.
Right.
But for breast cancer, they are more likely to get breast cancer at an early age. And so as someone who has small dogs, I took note of that I'm going to be more aware in the future that my small dogs might be more at risk for breast cancer. Do we know exactly why? There's some theories, but that's not what we're really thinking about. We're just thinking about those statistics and how to apply them to our individual dogs. And I just thought that that's the kind of thing you can ask a pet insurance company and say, what do I need to know about my breed?
Yes.
What do I need to have in my plan about my breed or the size of dog? that I have? Like my dog's going to be about 50 pounds. Is there anything I need to plan for? Because
Mhm.
then you can make sure that you're selecting a plan that actually will cover that, especially if you're when that dog's young, they want to sell you that plan now
Yeah.
because that's years of income for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
um, do you have any other tips, Amanda, about how to get the right provider, how to choose someone trustworthy, and are there any scams people should be looking out for?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know of any scams offhand. I do remember I had a client several years ago that